Hello, I am Barbara Meyer, and I'm happy to give you a quick overview about our paper, How Can Education Effectively Contribute to Meet Global Challenges? We face a plethora of challenges. There's environmental pollution, there are wars, there are the refugee movements, and we approach irreversible tipping points in global warming. Programs like UNESCO's Education for Sustainable Development try to face these challenges via education. And we know that we need sustainable action. What are the effects of education? People gain knowledge about what actions is needed. They build attitudes and values towards it. Their judgments and their intention really point towards sustainable action. But we have massive empirical evidence that when it comes to real life situations, people do not act sustainable despite all the inner processes pointing in this direction. In research spoken about the knowledge action gap, the attitude action gap, and so on. In our paper, we summarize it under the term inner-outer gap. Ultimately, if we want to overcome global challenges that threaten our very existence as a human race, we have to find ways to bridge this gap. Therefore, we have to know, and in the best case, empirically valid factors about what bridges this gap. We want to contribute in this endeavor with a systematic literature review. Within, we in-depth evaluated 56 articles on this topic, and we want to show you some results. There were 11 articles dealing with the research on morality, and there was shown that, for example, moral judgment, moral emotions, and moral motivation had an influence on the inner-outer gap. But meta-analysis showed that the correlation to moral actions was only small to moderate in size. There were 26 articles that dealt with consumer decisions, like, for example, car purchase. And it was shown that habits and attitudes played a role on the inner-outer gap, and self-transcendent values, for example, bridged the inner-outer gap, and self-enhancement values, for example, reinforced it. And there was further research, 19 articles, that, for example, showed that to have really free time bridges the inner-outer gap when people were emotionally involved, for example, in nature, that bridged the gap, and also psychological reasoning mechanisms play a big role in this. What was really interesting to us is that we repeatedly found a tripartite structure. Here you can see that in this tripartite structure, there is a focus on the self, or a social focus, or what we call a caring meta focus. And here you see some articles where this foci played a role, but not only this, most of the found factors that proved empirically valid within the other articles could also be classified within this tripartite structure. And by doing so, we found that when people had a focus on the self, not only in their developmental stage, but also in the very moment, or when a habit or automated reaction resided in a social focus once in the past, that always reinforced the gap. When people had a social focus, when, for example, role models or neighbors acted morally and sustainable, that was able to bridge the gap. But when people, for example, had to deal with unethical leadership, that reinforced the gap. So social focus could go in both directions. And finally, when there was a caring meta focus, that always bridged the gap. And there were a lot of people that seemed to be conflicted between foci, and that always was shown to bridge, to reinforce the gap, and therefore it would be helpful if people gain integrity in this caring meta focus. In our discussion, we want to problematize that educational systems usually value achievement and power in keeping the faith, which are self-enhancement values that reside in the focus on the self. But they ultimately should value benevolence, universalism, and humility that reside in the caring meter focus. Therefore, we think really a shift is needed in our thinking about education, and we should help people to gain integrity in this. In the discussion, we also want to suggest a measurement system that how the caring meter focus could be measured, or the development towards the caring meter focus. And we want to introduce 4 steps, or a step approach that educators can take out of all the results we gathered if they want to really teach sustainable development goals effectively. Therefore, we are really looking forward to seeing you on Thursday and discussing all the results with you.